Okay, in this video, we are now transitioning from discrete probability distributions to continuous probability distributions. The first that we are going to study is what we call the normal distribution, and later on, we will be focusing on the more specific type of normal distribution, which is the standard normal distribution. So this normal distribution is a special type of a continuous probability distribution, which is named after the German mathematician Johann Carl Friedrich Gauss. And if you will collect all the points coming from this distribution, the curve that you are going to create is what we call a normal curve. As we can see, a normal curve has a bell shape and it is symmetric with respect to the center value or to the center of the graph. Normal curves can be interpreted through the mean and standard deviation. If we take a look at the first set of graph, we have the red line and the blue line. If we focus our attention here, we can see that the two graphs have the same mean because they have the same location in terms of the center. But we could say that they have different standard deviations because as you look at the red graph, the area bounded by that graph is wider than the area bounded by the blue graph. That means in the red graph, the values are more spread than the values within the blue graph. But if we look at the second set of graphs, we can see that the center or the centers of each graph are not the same. That means if the centers are not the same, then they have different values in terms of the mean. In terms of the shape and the area bounded by the two graphs, we can clearly see, if we just base it on the picture or in the graph, that they have the same area. Therefore, the variation and the standard deviations of the two distributions or the two curves are the same or equal. These are the properties of a normal curve. The curve has a bell shape. The mean, the median, and the mode are all equal. It is symmetric about the mean. Again, if we cut the graph at its center, then the left side in terms of area is equal to the other side. The total area under the curve is 1. Take note that in normal distribution or even in the graphs of discrete probability distributions, the total area is equal to 1, which signifies or which means the total probability for the distribution. The last one is the curve is asymptotic to the x-axis. When we say asymptotic, if you look at the graph as it goes to the left, although it seems like it touches the x-axis, asymptotic means it will go very close to that line but will never cross the line. It is the same way on the other side. If you follow the line and magnify this, then the graph will never reach or cross the line. Therefore, it is asymptotic on both sides of the x-axis. Although it is not needed for you to really understand how to construct this function, I will just present to you how the graph of a normal distribution can be obtained. And this function has these components. We have the sigma, which is the standard deviation. We have the e value. And later on, we will be learning this x minus mu over sigma. And then it's a square of that value. Okay, but for now, again, it is not really that important for you to understand how this function is derived. This is presented for you to see the basis of the normal distribution and how the values are being obtained through this function. So what is a standard normal distribution? Standard normal distribution is a special case of normal distribution in which the mean is 0 and the variance is equal to 1. And that means if you take the square root of the variance, and that is the standard deviation, you also get a standard deviation of 1. The standard normal distribution is actually a normal distribution translated in a certain way. If we look at the values in terms of the center, we have these numbers 100, 200, and 300, and all the numbers in between those three numbers. Now, in the normal distribution, the actual values are listed, and then we also have the frequency in terms of how many numbers, like how many 200s do we have. That means we have 50 of the 200. And then the height varies, meaning to say the frequency will vary depending on the value on the x-axis. Now, once we translate a normal distribution to standard distribution, we are making the mean to be equal to 0, and there is a certain formula that can make or that can translate 200 to 0. As we can see, again, the values here are the actual body weights, and then these numbers will be translated to 0, -1, -2, -3, or 1, 2, and 3, and these numbers are obtained through a certain formula. Once we have translated a normal distribution that the mean becomes 0, then the normal distribution is now called the standard normal distribution. So how do we standardize a normal distribution? So how do we change the values in the normal distribution to make them ranging from negative infinity to 0 or 0 to positive infinity? And also just using 0, -1, -2, -3, or 1, 2, and 3. So this is the formula that I need you to remember. These numbers that you can see now in the graph in the standard normal distribution are what we call the z-values. The z-values can be obtained by using the formula x minus mu over sigma. Take note that the mu is the mean or the average. The sigma is the value of the standard deviation. This z-value is what we call the z-score. As an example, suppose we know that x is equal to a certain weight equal to 150, and the mu is equal to 200, and let's say assuming the standard deviation is equal to 30. So how do we get the z-value of this x value 150? So what we will do is we apply the formula z is equal to x minus mu over the sigma. Z is equal to x, our x is 150 minus the mu or the mean, which is 200, divided by 30. And then we compute the value of 150 minus 200 over 30. This will be -50 over 30, and this is -5 over 3. So how do we see this now in the graph? Well, -5 over 3 is -1 and 2 over 3. So it's a number in between -1 and -2. So again, how is the normal distribution translated into a standard normal distribution? The mean now is 0. The center of the normal distribution becomes 0. And then the value 150 will now be located at -1 and 2/3. As we can see, it is consistent because 150 is on the left of 200. Therefore, the z-value of 150 should also be at the left of 0, which is the new mean. So again, if you want to look for, or if you want to translate a normal distribution into a standard normal distribution, we need to make use of this formula, and all the new values are called the z-scores. Simply, to find the z-value, simply place the given x, and in this case, in our example, it is 150, so you place the 150 on the x, we place the mean on the mu, we place sigma 30 as the standard deviation. Now just watch out, just in case instead of the standard deviation you are given the variance, then that means you have to take the square root of the variance to get the standard deviation. Do not make the mistake of putting the variance in the sigma, because the variance is sigma squared and not sigma. Now we have this rule we call the empirical rule. The empirical rule is used for standard normal distribution, and it will describe about how many percent of the data are within a certain standard deviation. If you look at these numbers, -1, -2, -3, 1, 2, and 3, again, these are all standard deviations. 1 and -1, it means this blue area covers the data with one standard deviation away from the mean or center, that is 0. One standard deviation away from the mean, you are already covering about 70% of the data, or 68.26%. So if they ask how many values are now within one standard deviation, it's around 68.26%. And if you cover two standard deviations, if you add the 34.13, 34.13, 13.59, 13.59, you will get 95.44. And this number means when you consider two standard deviations, the data, the percentage of data is now around 95.44%. And you are almost covering everything, because 95 is very close to 100%. And then extending it to 3 standard deviation, it means we are covering 99.72%. Meaning to say, all the points here between -3 to 3 are around 99.72% of all the data that you have to graph. Okay? So, the use of the empirical rule is to answer questions like how many percent of the data or the distribution is already or is within one standard deviation. And you can simply use the rule and say it's already around 68%. And in terms of, with the decimal value, 68.26%. How many values are within two standard deviations? We have around 95.44%. How many or how many percent are within 3 standard deviations? Then we have 99.72%. Okay? Of course, if you are considering just the half of the graph, then you have to take half of these percentages. And as we can see, for example, in the blue graph, the whole thing is 68.26%. So on the right is half of 68.26, which is 34.13%, and on the left is also 34.13%.